Talia had known her son could be difficult. She had seen the arrogance, the stubbornness, the way Tate could shut people out when things became uncomfortable, but she had never fully understood the depth of what he had done to Noah. Not until now. The more pieces she uncovered, the more sickened she became. The sabotaged adoption, the lies Tate had told over the years to keep Noah from becoming a true part of the family. The cruel things he had whispered to other kids at school, shaping the way they saw Noah before they even had a chance to know him. The way Tate had made Noah feel like an outsider in the one place where he was supposed to feel safe. And then there was the abandonment. Tate hadn't sat Noah down, he hadn't explained himself, he hadn't offered an apology or even a goodbye. He had simply walked away and left Noah carrying the weight of the heartbreak alone. Talia felt something inside her break as she realized just how many times Noah had been hurt by the same person who claimed to love him. Her son. She thought about all the excuses she had made for Tate over the years. She had told herself he was scared, that he was young, that he didn't understand the consequences of his actions. But this was different. This wasn't one mistake, this was a pattern. Tate had repeatedly chosen his own fears, his own pride, and his own selfishness over Noah's feelings. For the first time, Talia didn't see her son as someone who had made a mistake. She saw him as someone who had caused serious, lasting damage to another person. The anger that rose inside her was almost overwhelming. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to grab him by the shoulders and ask how he could live with himself after everything he had done. She wanted to slap her own son, not because she hated him, but because she couldn't understand how the boy she raised could be capable of hurting someone so deeply and then act as if it didn't matter. For years, Talia had worried about protecting Tate from the world. Now she wondered who had been protecting Noah from Tate. "Noah," she said quietly, "I hear you." He looked down at the phone again, jaw tight, but she wasn't done. "I'm not going to argue with how you feel about what happened between you and Tate," she continued, careful but steady. "I won't pretend I know every piece of it the way you do." A pause. "But I will say this," she added, softer, "you matter in that room whether you think you do or not." Noah's throat tightened slightly at that, but he didn't respond. Talia continued, voice gentler now, almost tired in a way that felt personal. "I'm not asking you to celebrate him," she said. "I'm asking you not to disappear completely from something you were part of for a long time." That landed differently, not as pressure, as history, as something she couldn't erase even if she wanted to. Noah stared forward again, the driveway suddenly feeling closer and further away at the same time. He wasn't sure what part hurt more, the idea of going in and pretending, or the idea of not going and confirming a final kind of distance he wasn't ready to name. Talia waited again, quieter now, not pushing, just there. And Noah realized with uncomfortable clarity that this wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about whether the version of his life that included Tate still had any room left in it at all. Talia didn't speak right away. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy in a different way now, like she had stopped trying to find the right angle to respond from and was simply absorbing what he'd said without interruption. Noah stayed still on his porch, phone pressed to his ear, his gaze fixed on nothing beyond the view. His chest felt tight, not from regret, but from the pressure of finally saying things out loud that he had kept sealed for too long. When Talia finally did speak, her voice was lower. "Noah," she started, then paused, as if the name itself needed space before anything else could follow it. He didn't backtrack, didn't soften it, because there was nothing gentle left in him around this. "When I was younger," Noah said, cutting in before he lost momentum, "and Tate was the center of my world, I put up with everything. His apathy, his control, the way he'd smile at me at night like nothing was wrong and then turn around and talk about me like I was nothing to him while trashing me to people at school." His grip tightened on the phone again, jaw set. "He made it pretty clear every day that he only saw me as something he could use, something to exploit." A beat. "And do you know what he said to people?" Noah continued, voice sharpening. "The cheerleaders, the jocks, he said he kept me around to stroke his own ego, to make himself feel like the good guy in the situation." Talia stayed quiet. Noah could feel it now, the difference between shock and recognition. Like she was hearing something she had always suspected but never wanted confirmed in this exact shape. He told me he only said those things so people wouldn't ask what we were, Noah added bitterly. Like that made it better, like that excused it. His throat tightened but he didn't stop. He gaslit me for years, he said flatly. Years. I honestly believe, Talia, that whatever Tate told the popular kids at school was how he really felt, and when he got caught after I told him, I knew he lied to cover up his real feelings so he wouldn't lose the convenience of my body in his life. The word landed harder than anything else he had said so far. A long silence followed. Then Noah exhaled, sharper now, the controls slipping into something colder. He only cares about two things, he said, his ego and his dick. That one earned a faint shift on the line, Talia inhaling slightly like she hadn't expected the words to come out so cleanly, so final. Noah didn't soften it. If people ask why I'm not there, he continued, tell them I'm on a date with Riley. I'm going to do Tate a favor, he added, voice quieter now but no less firm. I'll do what he did to me and just disappear from his life. That word, disappear, hung between them, not dramatic, not poetic, just a decision. Noah finally leaned his head back against the seat again, staring at the ceiling of the car for a moment before continuing, the finality settling in as he spoke. I'm going to stay gone, he said. I'm not going to any of your family events, not celebrations, not weddings, nothing that has anything to do with him. His voice dropped slightly. I have nothing to celebrate, he said, especially when it concerns the bastard who left me. For a long moment there was only breathing on the line. Then Talia spoke again, careful, slower this time, like she was stepping through something fragile. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Noah didn't respond immediately, because part of him didn't care whether she knew or not. Noah exhaled into the phone like the air itself was too heavy to hold. Joey warned me, he said again, quieter this time, like repeating it might make more sense. The day he told Tate about the cancer, he told me to get as far away from Tate as I could. Noah's eyes stayed fixed on nothing through the windshield, but his voice sharpened with memory. He tried to warn me because Joey knew, Noah continued. Knew what I couldn't accept then, that Tate abandoned him just like he later did to me. A pause, but he didn't stop there. Joey didn't want me to end up like that, Noah said, jaw tight. He didn't want me to go through so young. Joey said Tate only cares about himself, only what he wants, only what he needs in the moment, and when someone doesn't fit that anymore, he drops them. Noah swallowed once, the words turning bitter as they came out. And then he rubs it in their face, he added, in front of everyone, like the person he left was never worth anything in the first place. Talia didn't interrupt. She was listening fully now but carefully, like she could hear how close he was to something breaking. Noah let out a short, humorless breath. If I'm going to be brutally honest, he said, and his grip on the phone tightened again, I wish Joey was still alive instead of Tate. There was a beat of silence on the line. Then Noah corrected himself immediately, voice cracking just slightly at the edges, not softer in meaning but rower in truth. Joey protected me while Tate used me to feel better about his dick and to warm himself at night. He stopped, breath catching. His throat tightened like the thought itself was too big to carry properly in language. Joey shouldn't be gone or die at 35 while his selfish nephew drinks, whores, and abandons everyone using his uncle's money, he said, slower now, quieter. Joey was the one who saw Tate clearly. He was the one who understood Tate better than I did. He was the one who tried to protect me from Tate's cruelty. A pause. And now he's gone, Noah added, voice lower, and Tate is still here. That sentence landed differently than the last one. He looked down at the steering wheel, fingers flexing once against it. I keep thinking about that, he admitted. Not Tate getting married, not today, just Joey is not being here. His voice dropped further. Joey was the one who mattered in all of this, Noah said, almost to himself now. He was the one who tried to warn me, he was the one who actually cared if I got hurt. A long silence followed, then more quietly, almost like it hurt to admit it out loud. I keep replaying what he said to me, Noah continued. About Tate, about his nephew leaving people, about how he does it intentionally. A small shake of his head. And I didn't listen, he said. I thought I was different, I thought I could be the exception. His grip loosened slightly, but his voice stayed tight. "And now Joey's gone," Noah said again, softer, "and I don't get to ask him what he meant. I don't get to tell him I understand now." The car felt still in a way that made everything else feel farther away. "I don't care about the wedding," Noah added quietly, like it was less important than the truth he was circling. "I don't care about Tate right now, He stopped again, swallowing. "I just wish Joey was still here," he finished. Talia sighed. "I don't care if Tate is inconvenienced, I don't care if Chloe feels awkward. She chose to marry a man who refuses to face his own emotions, a man who avoids accountability and treats people like they're disposable. Tate is arrogant, condescending, and completely blind to the damage he causes. He spent 22 years showing me what loyalty, companionship, and trust were supposed to mean, only to prove that, when it mattered most, none of it meant anything to him. And now I'm supposed to show up and celebrate him making a promise to someone else? I'm supposed to stand there and pretend his word has value when he has spent years proving that it doesn't? No, I won't do that. I feel sorry for Chloe, I really do. I wish I could warn her. I wish someone had warned me years before 1986. But she won't listen because she's where I was once, believing in the version of Tate she wants to see instead of the person he actually is. Maybe someday she'll understand. Tate deserves to be alone. He deserves to lose the people who kept forgiving him. He deserves to finally face the consequences of the way he treats others. He doesn't deserve my company, not after everything. The only reason he thinks he can pull me back whenever he wants is because he believes money fixes things. He writes a check, and suddenly he thinks he has paid his way out of guilt. He thinks he can buy forgiveness because he doesn't want to sit with the pain of what he's done. But I am not something he can purchase. I don't want anything from Tate. I don't want his apologies. I don't want his money. I don't want his explanations. I don't want to hear his name. I don't want to see him again. And if anyone in my life cannot respect that boundary, then they are choosing him over me, and I will remove them from my life too. For once I am choosing myself. Noah ended the call without saying goodbye. He just pulled the phone away from his ear, set it down, and sat there for a moment longer in the quiet of the porch. No movement, no decision yet, just that suspended feeling that followed conversations like that where nothing was fully resolved but everything had already changed shape. He poured himself whiskey, Joey's favorite drink, and plopped 2 ice cubes in his glass, toasting his surrogate uncle before drinking 3 shots. It didn't solve anything. It filled time, it blurred edges, it gave his hands a task when his mind didn't want to stay still. The drink was sharp going down, familiar in a way he didn't bother analyzing too deeply. He poured a second glass later without much ceremony, sitting somewhere between intention and avoidance. Outside, the day kept moving. By the time it was closer to mid-afternoon, Noah had changed direction again without really announcing it to himself. The house, the quiet, the static thoughts, they all started to feel too contained, too small for the pressure building behind his ribs, so he left again. A cab drove Noah to the bistro. Familiar roads, familiar turns, his body doing what it knew how to do even when his mind was elsewhere. When he arrived, the place felt normal in a way that almost irritated him, people eating, talking, existing in their own separate timelines. And there was Riley, already there. Noah saw him before Riley saw him, sitting as he belonged there, relaxed in a way that didn't feel performative. When he looked up and noticed Noah, his face changed immediately, attention locking in, open and unguarded in a way that didn't leave room for confusion. "Hey," Riley said, smiling as Noah approached. "I was starting to think I beat you here by too much." Noah sat down next to him, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly without permission. Something about Riley's presence made the noise in his head feel less sharp, not gone, just farther away. "Traffic was a bitch," Noah said lightly as it mattered. Riley studied him for half a second, not intrusive, just observant, then his smile softened. "You look like your day's been a lot," he said. Noah let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. "You have no idea," he replied. But even as he said it, something in him shifted, just slightly. Not resolution, not healing, just distraction finding a place to sit. Riley leaned in a little, attention steady as always, like Noah was the only thing in the room worth focusing on. "Good thing I'm here then," he said simply. And Noah let himself sit in that for a moment, not thinking about weddings, not thinking about absence, not thinking about the other side of town at all, just the sound of someone talking to him like he was present and staying that way. The restaurant had that early evening hum that made everything feel slightly softened around the edges. Clinking cutlery, low conversations, the occasional burst of laughter from another table that didn't belong to them. Riley ordered spaghetti like it was the most obvious choice in the world. Noah went with a club sandwich more out of habit than preference, something simple he didn't have to think too hard about. At first the conversation stayed light. Work. Riley talked about entertainment and PR the way someone talks about something they're good at but not defined by. There was structure in it, but not rigidity. He described dealing with clients, managing chaos behind polished public images, smoothing out other people's mistakes without making it look like anything was ever wrong in the first place. Noah found himself listening more than he expected to, then Riley asked questions back, not the surface kind, not the filler kind people use when they're waiting for their turn to speak. Actual questions. What do you like about your job? What's something you wish you had more time for? Where do you see yourself if you stop doing what you're doing just because it's what you've always done? Noah hesitated at that last one, but he answered anyway. Somewhere between bites and pauses, the conversation shifted into something more personal without either of them forcing it there. Riley talked about relationships first, like he wasn't trying to present a version of himself that would land better, just the truth as it was. He dated women. A few. One man, nothing dramatic in the way he described it. No big identity crisis story, no performative confusion, just experience. I don't really do the hookup thing, Riley said at one point, twisting his fork slowly through the pasta. Not that I judge anyone who do it, it just never stuck for me. He glanced up briefly. But if that's your thing, I'm not going to act weird about it. There was a pause, small but intentional. Then he added more honestly, I'm looking for a partner, not a rotation of people, someone I can actually build something with. Noah let that sit for a moment. There was no pressure in it, no expectation, just clarity, so Noah matched it with his own honesty even if it came out more carefully. I've done anonymous hookups before, he admitted. Sometimes it's easier, less complicated. Riley nodded like that made sense, like he wasn't trying to correct it or challenge it. Noah continued. But I'm not really looking for that anymore, he said. I want someone who shows up, emotionally, someone I can support and who actually lets me support them back. That part felt more vulnerable than he expected it to, not because it was dramatic, because it was simple. Riley didn't interrupt. He just watched Noah for a second, steady, attentive in that way he had that didn't feel like evaluation. More like understanding. Then he nodded. I think that's fair, Riley said. Actually, I think that's kind of the point. A small pause. And for what it's worth, he added, a faint smile returning, you don't seem like someone who's casual about people, even if you try to be. Noah almost deflected that instinctively. But he didn't. Instead, he just looked down at his drink for a moment, turning the glass slightly in his hand. The conversation didn't suddenly become heavy after that. It didn't need to. It just stayed real in a way that didn't demand performance from either of them. And for the first time that day, Noah realized something quietly unsettling. He hadn't thought about Tate for a while. Riley had been talking about sports, something about his favorite teams, the way he followed seasons more like patterns than obsession when Noah's phone started ringing again. And didn't stop. It wasn't just a call anymore. It became a rhythm, a disruption that kept looping back in before anything else could fully settle. The screen would light up, go dark, light up again, voicemail after voicemail stacking like an unwanted chorus. Each time it ended, another call seemed to begin within seconds, no space in between, no chance for silence to reclaim the table. At first, Riley tried to continue talking through it, then he stopped. Not annoyed, not offended, just attentive in a different direction now. His fork paused midair once, then again. After a while he set it down entirely and leaned back slightly, watching Noah instead of the phone. You okay? Riley asked, voice careful but steady. Do you need to step out and take that? Is it your family? Is someone not okay? No panic in his tone, just concerned, trying to place itself correctly. Noah looked at the screen, then back up and let out a short laugh that didn't quite match the situation. It's nothing, he said like it was already decided, like the calls weren't important enough to change anything. Riley's eyes narrowed slightly, not suspicious, just trying to understand the mismatch between the noise and Noah's reaction. Noah shrugged. My family's going to a wedding, he said, and I chose to come on a date instead. That earned a pause. Riley didn't react immediately, just studied him for a moment like he was trying to decide whether that was a joke or a statement with consequences. Okay, Riley said finally, carefully neutral. I'm not sure I want to step on that minefield, but it's up to you if you want to talk about it. A beat. I really don't know what I'm walking into here. Noah leaned back slightly, the phone still vibrating again on the table like it was determined to stay present even if he wasn't answering it. They're trying to convince me to come to something, Noah said almost dismissively. I'd rather be run over by a car than attend. The words were blunt, but there wasn't much heat in them anymore, more exhaustion than rage. Riley didn't laugh. He didn't judge it either. He just tilted his head slightly, eyes steady on Noah. That sounds intense, he said. Is it the wedding thing you mentioned? Noah exhaled through his nose, watching another call flash across the screen and fade again. Yeah, he said, it's that. Riley nodded slowly like pieces were clicking into place, but he didn't push further yet. Instead, he asked the only question that actually mattered in the moment. Do you want to talk about what makes it feel like that, he said gently, or do you just want to ignore the phone and finish your food? It wasn't advice, it wasn't pressure, just a choice laid out cleanly. Noah looked at him for a second longer than expected, phone still buzzing softly against the table between them like a third presence neither of them could fully dismiss. And for the first time in the middle of all those interruptions, he realized Riley wasn't reacting to the chaos. He was waiting to see what Noah chose inside it. Riley had just started to ask, almost gently, do you want dessert or... The phone rang again, same pattern, same insistence, same refusal to be ignored. Noah stared at it this time like it had personally offended him. Something in him snapped not loudly at first but decisively. He answered. What the fuck do you want from me? Noah said, sharper than he intended, voice carrying more than he realized across the restaurant. A few heads turned immediately. Riley went still. Noah registered that a second too late, his own awareness catching up to his mouth. Heat rushed into his face. Excuse me, no, he corrected quickly, pushing back from the table. I'll be right back. He stood, already grabbing the phone tighter, already moving before anyone could respond. Riley watched him carefully but didn't stop him. Noah walked fast, weaving past tables, past the hum of conversation that suddenly felt too loud against his skin. The foyer was quieter, still not silent, but enough that he could hear his own breathing again. He stepped just out of sight of the dining room and lifted the phone back to his ear. Why do you keep calling me? Noah demanded immediately. On the other end, Susie's voice hit like a wall, loud, unfiltered, already mid-rant. Where the hell are you? She snapped. We need you here. Talia is hysterical. Do you understand me? Hysterical. Terrence is no help at all. Chloe is perfect as always, like she always is, and Tate hasn't even arrived yet. Noah closed his eyes for a second, jaw tightening. Susie didn't slow down. This is not the time to disappear, Noah, she yelled. People are asking questions. The ceremony is in a few minutes. Do you have any idea how this looks? Are you even coming or not? Noah exhaled sharply through his nose. I'm not coming, he said flatly. There was a beat of silence, just long enough for Susie to process that answer. Then she exploded again. What do you mean you're not coming? Susie shouted. Are you serious right now? Everyone is here except you, and Tate hasn't even shown up, and you're just, on a date or something? Noah's grip tightened on the phone. Yeah, he said colder now, I'm on a date. Are you fucking kidding me? Susie yelled so loudly that it made him pull the phone slightly away from his ear. At this time, today, are you trying to make a point or are you just being cruel? Noah let out a short laugh, humorless. A point, he repeated. No, I'm just not there. Susie cut in again, voice sharp and frantic. You don't understand what this is doing to Talia, she said. She keeps asking where you are, she keeps looking at the door like you're going to walk in and you're not. Do you hear me? You're not showing up for any of this. Noah stared at the floor for a second, phone pressed tight against his ear. "I've shown up for a lot of things I shouldn't have," he said quietly. Susie didn't soften. "This isn't about Tate right now," she snapped. "This is about people who care about you asking where you are and you just vanishing." Noah's voice stayed steady, but something underneath it was fraying. "I didn't vanish," he said. "I told Talia I wasn't coming." "You think that makes it better?" Susie shouted. "Do you have any idea what it's like in there right now? Everyone's trying to act normal and you're just absent." Noah closed his eyes briefly. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "Susie," he said, controlled but firm, "I'm not part of this wedding. I'm not part of their day. I'm not a member of the Blue family or standing in a room pretending I'm okay with things I'm not okay with." A pause. Then Susie again, slightly less loud but still sharp. "So that's it, you just choose not to show up and everyone else has to deal with it." Noah's jaw tightened. "Yeah," he said simply, "that's it. Tate's done that for years and everyone just sucks it up and takes it like a champ and moves on and accepts it. Why can't I do that?" Silence followed, but not peace, just distance. Then Susie, quieter now but still tense. "Talia is going to be devastated." Noah didn't respond right away. Because he already knew that, and because for the first time in the entire day, he wasn't sure whether that changed anything he was going to do. Susie's voice was still sharp in his ear, cutting through the quiet foyer like she refused to be dismissed. "Are you seriously just going to let people deal with this on their own?" she snapped. "Noah, answer me." Noah let out a small, almost empty smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe I will," he said flatly. That made Susie pause for half a second. "What?" she demanded. Noah leaned back slightly against the wall, phone pressed to his ear, expression gone distant in a way that didn't match the heat in his voice. "For 22 years, he said, I had the perfect teacher on how to avoid emotional tangles, conflict, and deflection. A beat. Maybe I just don't want to deal with the Blue family crap today." Susie started talking over him immediately, louder again. "No, that's not." But he cut in. "I'm not sorry for not attending," he said. "And I'm not the reason I'm not attending. Whatever happens in there, whatever doesn't happen, it has nothing to do with me." His grip tightened slightly on the phone. "I told Talia the first time we ever sat in a restaurant together in public after I moved out of the Green Rambler that I wasn't coming to family events. I said it clearly." His voice sharpened. "And I resent people trying to push me or manipulate me into doing something I don't want to do." That finally made Susie explode again. "Manipulate you?" she shouted. "Noah, this is a wedding." "No," he snapped, louder now, voice cracking through the foyer before he could stop it. "If none of you can understand why I don't want to be there, that's fine, just fucking leave me alone." There was a beat of silence on the other end, not because Susie was done, because she was recalibrating. Then she came back harder, voice raised again, more emotional now than strategic. "Noah, have a heart," she shouted. "At least come for Talia, do you hear me, for Talia? I'm done letting other people choose for me. I'm done sacrificing my own happiness, my own peace of mind, and my own feelings just to keep everyone else comfortable. For once in my life, I'm putting my foot down, and I don't care if it hurts people. I have explained myself a dozen times. I have told everyone exactly why I'm not coming. If people refuse to listen, refuse to understand, or decide that my feelings don't matter because they're inconvenient, then that's their choice. I don't need to be there. The groom himself made it clear that he doesn't want me as part of his family. He made his choice. He showed me exactly where I stand. So why am I expected to show up and celebrate something that makes me feel like I was never important to begin with? Maybe for once I'm going to do what Tate Blue does. Maybe I'm just not going to show up. Maybe everyone else can deal with the consequences of that. I spent years being the person who stayed, the person who forgave, the person who put everyone else first. And what did that get me? Nothing. So everyone can either accept my decision or they can be angry. They can complain. They can say whatever they want, but I'm not changing my mind. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to find my happiness. And if people can't understand that, or if they don't care enough to show me even a little compassion, then they can leave me alone. I'm done begging people to care about my feelings. Fuck you and fuck Tate." Noah didn't wait for a response. He hung up. For a second he just stood there in the foyer, phone still in his hand, the absence of Susie's voice suddenly louder than her yelling had been. Through the glass doors the restaurant continued as if nothing had happened. People are still talking, eating, living in a timeline that didn't include him. Behind him, somewhere deeper in the building, Riley was still sitting at the table waiting. Noah stared at his reflection faintly in the glass, tired eyes, tight jaw, something unresolved sitting just beneath the surface of his expression. He didn't feel victorious, he didn't feel relieved, just separated. From the call, from the wedding, from the expectation that he would keep absorbing things that didn't belong to him. After a moment, he turned back toward the table anyway. Because whatever was waiting in that seat with Riley, awkward or not, was still real. And right now, reality felt easier to face than anything else. Noah had barely taken 2 steps back toward the dining area when his pocket started vibrating again. He stopped, closed his eyes for half a second like that might somehow make it stop being true, then he pulled the phone out. Unknown caller ID again, but this time something about it felt different, familiar in a way he couldn't immediately place until he answered. "Hello," Noah said, still a little tight around the edges. A pause. Then a voice calmer than Susie's, less sharp than Talia's panic but still carrying concern. "Hey, it's Andrew." Noah exhaled slowly through his nose. Of course, it was Andrew. That actually made sense in a way the rest of the day hadn't. "Yeah," Noah said, leaning slightly against the wall again. "Hi." A small pause on the other end, like Andrew was checking the temperature of the situation before stepping further in. "Are you okay?" Andrew asked. "I just got a couple very chaotic messages floating around. People are saying you're not at the wedding." Noah let out a short, humorless breath. "I'm not," he said simply. Another pause. Then Andrew more carefully said, "Okay, are you safe, like physically or emotionally, okay? Because I heard Susie yelling something about you leaving and Talia's pretty upset." Noah rubbed the back of his neck with his free hand. "I'm fine," he said. "I'm at a restaurant, I'm literally just eating a bit with someone," he added, almost like an afterthought. Andrew processed that. "Oh," he said, "a date?" "Yeah," Noah replied. There was a slight shift in Andrew's tone after that, not judgment, just recalibration. "Good for you, okay," Andrew said slowly. "That actually helps me understand some of the panic happening on my end." Noah huffed lightly. "I didn't realize I was responsible for panic on multiple fronts today," Noah said. "You kind of are," Andrew replied, but there was faint humor in it now. "It's a big day, people are emotionally overloaded." Noah glanced toward the dining room through the glass. Riley was still there, still waiting, still present in a way that didn't feel complicated. "I'm not involved in that," Noah said quietly. "I know," Andrew said immediately. "I'm not calling to pull you in, I'm calling to make sure you're okay and not," he paused, searching for the right words, "spiraling." Noah gave a short laugh. "Define spiraling," he said. A soft exhale from Andrew. "Fair," Andrew said. "Let me rephrase. Are you okay with the choices you're making today? Not anyone else's reaction to them. Yours. If you start to spiral or feel overwhelmed, call your therapist or make an appointment. It's important, Noah, that you have structure and a support system professionally and socially. It's not my business to judge where you're supposed to be right now, but if you're not okay with attending the wedding or celebrating, that's your business. I'm not judging anything you do or don't today. I'm just checking in to make sure you're stable. It's all right if you're not." Noah looked down at the phone in his hand, then out toward the street through the glass doors, like distance might clarify something inside him. "I don't know," he admitted finally. Andrew didn't rush in to fill the silence. Instead, he said, "That's better than pretending you do." A pause. Then Andrew continued more gently, "Look, I'm not going to lecture you. I'm also not going to relay messages from the wedding battlefield. I just wanted to make sure you weren't alone in whatever this is for you." Noah swallowed slightly. "I'm not alone," he said almost automatically. Then after a beat quieter, "I'm just not there." Andrew acknowledged that with a soft hum. "Okay," he said, "then stay where you are for now, eat your food, don't make any sudden life decisions in the middle of a storm of phone calls." Noah huffed again, but there was less edge to it now. "That's a very specific instruction," he said. "I've learned from experience," Andrew replied dryly. That earned the faintest real smile from Noah, not big, not long, but enough to exist. After a moment, Andrew added, "If you want, we can talk later when things calm down. No pressure, okay?" Noah hesitated, then nodded slightly, even though Andrew couldn't see it. "Yeah," Noah said, "okay." A pause. "Thanks," Noah added quieter. "Anytime," Andrew said simply. The call ended after Andrew said goodbye. Noah stood there for a second longer than necessary, phone still in his hand, the noise in his life temporarily reduced to something manageable again. Then he turned and walked back into the restaurant, back toward Riley, and whatever version of the rest of his day was still waiting for him. Noah drove home without turning the radio on, the silence in the car feeling less like peace and more like insulation, like the world had been pushed a few feet farther away so he didn't have to hear it breathing against him. When he got back, he didn't rush. He parked his SUV, sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel, didn't look at anything in particular, just let the day exist without him participating in it for a few seconds longer. Then he checked his phone. The screen lit up immediately, almost aggressively, like it had been waiting. 53 missed calls. 21 voicemails. 11 texts. Noah stared at the number longer than he meant to. It didn't feel real in the way numbers are supposed to feel real. It felt like someone else's problem rendered in digital form, a volume he hadn't agreed to carry. He scrolled once through the list without opening anything. Names repeated. Some he recognized immediately, some blurred together, Susie, Talia, unknown numbers, then Susie again, then Talia again. Voicemails stacked underneath like they had weight. He didn't listen, not one. Instead, he pressed and held the power button until the screen asked him if he was sure. He was. The phone went dark, no vibration, no glow, no persistence, just nothing. For the first time all day, the silence was complete. Noah got out of the car and walked up to his house. The air outside felt normal in a way that almost didn't match what had just happened in his hands. No urgency waiting for him, just the ordinary stillness of a late afternoon that didn't know it had been emotionally escalated elsewhere. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind him. The sound was soft, final in a domestic way rather than a dramatic one, not an ending that announced itself. Just a boundary that existed whether anyone else accepted it or not. The house was exactly how he had left it, quiet, unchanged, indifferent. Noah stood in the entryway for a moment, phone still off in his hand, then slowly lowered it onto a nearby surface like he was setting down something that had become too heavy to keep carrying. He didn't move right away after that, just stayed there in his own space where nothing could ring or demand or insist. And for the first time that day, no one was asking him to answer anything at all. Mark called at 5 in the evening after the vows were said, offering to come over instead of attending the reception, his voice steady in that way it always got when he could tell Noah was starting to slip past the point of holding things together on his own. He said he could sit with him, not talk if Noah didn't want to talk, just be there while Noah worked through whatever was building up in his chest. He even said he could hold him if Noah ended up crying, like it wasn't unusual, like it wasn't something that needed fixing, just surviving. Noah didn't answer that call, he put the phone down instead. Riley texted once too, something simple, asking if he was okay, but Noah didn't open that either. Instead, he went to the couch and fell asleep before 6. A loud noise cut straight through his skull, sharp enough that he winced before he even fully understood what he was hearing. It echoed through the house again, louder this time, more deliberate, like whoever was outside wasn't leaving until someone answered. Noah lay still for a second, staring at the ceiling, heart slow but heavy, trying to orient himself enough to decide whether the world outside the door was something he was ready to deal with. The pounding came again, harder, and this time it didn't feel like it was going to stop. I heard a key rattling in the front lock, metal scraping against metal in a rushed, unsteady rhythm that didn't belong to me. The door swung open with a hard bang that made my skull throb in protest before I even processed what it meant. For a second I just lay there, half sunk into the couch, too lucid to sleep it off and too wrecked to move quickly, staring toward the hallway like my body hadn't decided whether to defend itself or surrender. Footsteps followed immediately, fast, purposeful, not hesitant at all. Whoever it was didn't pause, didn't call out, just came in like they already knew exactly what they were going to find. The living room light snapped on. It hit my eyes like a blade, white, harsh, unforgiving. My migraine spiked instantly, pain flaring behind my eyes so sharply I had to squeeze them shut for a second just to keep from gagging at the sensation. The room swam when I tried to focus again, shapes bending at the edges, my body slow to catch up to anything happening outside of it. And then I saw her, of all people. Susie stood there in the doorway to the living room, arms crossed tight over her chest, posture rigid in that way that always meant she had already decided she was angry before she even walked in. Her face was set in a scowl that didn't leave much room for negotiation, her eyes locking onto me immediately like she had been waiting all night for this exact moment. For a second, neither of us spoke. I blinked slowly, trying to force my vision into something usable. "How did you get in here?" I managed, my voice rough and wrong in my own ears. Susie didn't move. "Your front door was unlocked," she said sharply, "which is just great, by the way, fantastic life choice." I let out a slow breath that felt like it scraped my throat on the way out. "I didn't ask you to come into my house," I said, quieter this time because anything louder felt like it might split my head open. "No," she snapped immediately. "You didn't, because you're not answering your phone, you're not answering anyone, and apparently you think disappearing after drinking yourself into a coma is a personality trait now." I tried to push myself up a little, immediately regretting it as the room tilted in protest. "I'm fine," I said automatically, even though my body felt like it was actively disagreeing. Susie gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're not fine," she said. "You smell like you tried to drown your brain in whiskey and loss. Do you have any idea how many people were looking for you?" I closed my eyes again for a second, the light still too much even through my eyelids. "Did Talia send you?" I asked. "No," Susie said. "I came because nobody could get you to answer, and Mark was about 5 seconds away from driving over here himself, and I told him I would beat him to it." That made something in my chest tighten, not guilt exactly, but awareness of the noise I had shut out, of how far I had gone to make it all stop. Susie stepped further into the room, her voice lowering slightly, though the anger didn't leave it. "You can't just shut your phone off and vanish after a day like that," she said, "not when people are." She stopped herself, exhaling sharply through her nose. "I'm not here to fight you," she added, but it didn't sound like she was done being angry. "I'm here because you're clearly not okay." I looked at her through the haze in my head, trying to find something steady enough to hold onto in the conversation. "I didn't want to be part of it," I said again, slower now, "any of it." Susie didn't respond right away. Just stared at me for a long moment, like she was trying to decide whether to yell again or change strategy entirely. And in the silence, the pounding in my head filled every space she didn't. Susie didn't soften when she took in the room. Her eyes moved slowly, deliberately from my face to the coffee table, then to the floor beside it, then back again like she was confirming something she already suspected but didn't want to see fully realized. "Jesus," she muttered under her breath. Then louder, sharper, "Jesus, Noah, you reek." I blinked at her, slow and unfocused, my head still pounding like it was trying to split itself open from the inside. My mouth tasted as if something had died in it and stayed there. Susie stepped further into the room and I could hear her shoes crunch slightly on something glass-adjacent near the floor. I didn't even look to see what it was. The coffee table was a mess. Empty bottles stood like wreckage markers. Shot glasses are scattered in uneven clusters. Some tipped over, some were half-filled with dried residue. A sticky sheen of spilled whiskey had dried into uneven patches on the wood, catching the light in a way that made the whole surface look contaminated. Susie stared at it for a long moment, then she looked at me again. "You look like a semi-truck ran you over before your body crawled into bed," she said flatly. I let out a slow breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Thanks," I muttered. She didn't react to that. Instead, she crouched slightly, picking up one of the empty bottles from the table, turning it in her hand like she needed confirmation of what she was seeing. "How much did you drink?" she asked. I hesitated. That pause was answer enough. Susie's jaw tightened. "Oh my God," she said, more to herself than to me, "Noah." I shifted slightly on the couch, immediately regretting it as another wave of nausea and pain rolled through my head. "I was fine," I said again, though it sounded weaker this time. "I just wanted it quiet." Susie looked up at that. "Quiet," she repeated. "You turned your entire brain into a blackout for quiet." I didn't answer. She set the bottle down harder than necessary. "This isn't quiet," she said. "This is you trying to erase a day that hurt you instead of dealing with it." I stared at her, but my focus kept slipping around her face like I couldn't lock onto it properly. "It worked," I said almost defensively, "for a while." Susie let out a short, incredulous laugh. Yeah, she said, until you woke up in a disaster zone with a concussion-level hangover and your house looking like a bar fight had happened in it. She stepped closer to the couch now, arms still crossed, but her tone shifted, less explosive, more controlled. You didn't answer Mark's calls, she said. You didn't answer Talia, you didn't answer anyone. I looked away from her then, staring at the floor instead. I didn't want to talk, I said quietly. Susie exhaled through her nose. No, she said, you wanted to disappear. That landed heavier than anything else she'd said so far. The room felt too bright again, even though nothing had changed. Susie's voice lowered slightly but stayed firm. You can't do that, she said. Not like this, not by shutting everything off and drinking yourself into a hole and hoping people stop noticing you exist. I swallowed, my throat dry and tight. I didn't ask anyone to come here, I said. No, Susie replied immediately, but people care whether you ask or not. That one didn't get an answer, not because I didn't have one, because I didn't know which part of it I was supposed to believe it anymore. Susie stayed where she was for a moment, watching me carefully like she didn't trust me to stay conscious and upright at the same time. Then she exhaled, slower this time, some of the sharpness finally dropping out of her shoulders. Okay, she said quietly like she was switching from anger to triage. We're going to reset this. I blinked at her. Reset sounded like too big a word for the shape my body was in. She walked into the kitchen again and came back with a fresh glass of water, new, clean, filled higher than the last one. No more alcohol, she said firmly, setting it on the coffee table but still keeping a hand on it like she didn't trust the situation. Not even a sip, you understand me? I nodded slowly. Good, she said, now sit still, don't try to prove anything. I let my head rest back against the couch again, the room still slightly unstable but less aggressive than before. Susie glanced around the living room once more, at the bags, the bottles, the chaos I'd left behind. You really did a number on this place, she muttered. I didn't plan it, I said weakly. No one plans this, she shot back but without the bite from earlier. A pause. Then she added quieter, what were you trying to do, Noah? I hesitated, because the honest answer felt too big and too simple at the same time. I just wanted it to stop ringing in my head, I said finally. Susie looked at me for a long moment, then she nodded once like she understood that part at least. Okay, she said, but next time it rings in your head you don't do this, you call someone, you call Mark, you call me, you call literally anyone who isn't a bottle. I didn't answer right away. She sighed and sat down in the chair across from me, not fully relaxed, still alert but no longer packing. Drink the water, she said again, softer now, slow, and breathe, that's all you have to do for the next little while. I took another sip. The house was still messy, my head still hurts, but for the first time since waking up I wasn't actively falling apart in motion, just sitting still in the aftermath of it with someone else refusing to let me disappear into it completely. I lay there on the couch, staring at the ceiling while Susie stayed in the room like she was anchoring it to something stable. The water glass was still in my hand, untouched for a moment, my thoughts drifting in a way that didn't feel fully under my control yet, slow, foggy but sharp in pockets. What time is it? Noah asked, rubbing his temples as he stared blankly ahead. Susie looked over at him, shaking her head slightly. It's 9 in the morning, she said. A beautiful Monday the 13th. Noah let out a quiet breath, almost like he couldn't believe the world was still moving normally around him. 9 in the morning. A regular Monday. The kind of morning where people went to work, drank coffee, answered phones, and made plans for the future. But Noah felt like he was standing in the middle of a storm that nobody else could see. He rubbed his forehead again, trying to push away the exhaustion behind his eyes. After everything that had happened, after every argument and every painful memory that had resurfaced, the fact that the sun was shining felt almost unfair. How can it be such a beautiful day? Noah muttered. Susie watched him carefully. She knew that wasn't really a question about the weather. It was about how the world could look so peaceful when Noah felt anything but. Yesterday, Tate wasn't married, he was just someone's fiancé. A man who could still, in theory, walk away from a ceremony, leave a room, change his mind, step outside a role that wasn't fully sealed yet. There had still been a version of him that existed in possibility, even if I hated what that possibility meant. Today, June 13th, he wasn't single. Tate wasn't that anymore. Tate was a married man. That meant something different in a way I didn't want to fully articulate. A wife, a family, in-laws, responsibilities, a structure that wasn't just emotional anymore but social, legal, and permanent in the ways people used permanence when they wanted things to feel settled and final. It wasn't just a relationship now, it was a system, a world, a straight heteronormative world with rules that didn't bend easily for anything outside of it, and something about that realization hit me in a way I couldn't immediately soften. It felt like Chernobyl, not in the dramatic sense of destruction but in the sense of contamination spreading through every space it touched. Except instead of a reactor, it was a life I used to think I could still enter if certain conditions ever changed. Even if Tate changed his mind someday, even if he came back and wanted to climb into bed with me the way we used to, it wouldn't matter. Tate wasn't free anymore. He couldn't just walk back into my life and expect to have the same place he always had. He couldn't crawl into my bed whenever he wanted, hold on to me whenever he was afraid, and pretend that nothing had changed. The only bed Tate belonged in now was his own. The bed he shared with Chloe. And somehow, that hurt more than I wanted to admit. Because Tate had shared a bed with someone else. Not me. For 22 years, I had convinced myself that what we had meant something. That the way he held on to me, the way he trusted me, the way he rested against me was something special. Something that belonged only to us. But I was wrong. I wasn't the only person who had felt Tate's weight beside me. I wasn't the only person whose chest he rested against. I wasn't the only person who had comforted him when he was vulnerable. Now it was Chloe. Now she was the person who got to wake up beside him. She was the person whose arms he reached for. She was the person who had the title, the commitment, the life everyone recognized. Their bed had a legitimacy ours never had. That was the part that hurt the most. Everything we had shared suddenly felt smaller in comparison. Like all those years could be dismissed because they didn't fit into the version of love the world accepted. Maybe what we had was real to me. Maybe it mattered. But to Tate, it was something he could leave behind. A chapter he closed. A memory from another life. And now I had to accept the truth I had been avoiding. Tate didn't need me anymore. Whatever we were for 22 years was behind us now. A part of the past. A childhood fantasy I had held on to long after Tate had let go. Tate being single used to mean there was at least a door somewhere even if I never walked through it. Now the door wasn't just closed, it was reclassified, sealed, removed, erased, rewritten into something I wasn't part of anymore. Even if some impossible, ridiculous chance if Tate ever did feel something for me, even if that thought had ever been real outside my own head, it didn't matter now. He couldn't choose me. Not because of emotion, because of the structure, because of status, because of familial matrimonial responsibility, because of everything that now existed around him that didn't include me and couldn't be undone by feeling alone. I took a slow sip of water without thinking. It tasted like nothing, and for a moment that was the only thing my mind could really register clearly. Susie stayed quiet for once, letting the room hold the silence instead of rushing to fill it. I kept staring at the ceiling, the water glass still in my hand. My thoughts drifting backward without permission. When we were teenagers, Tate used to talk like nothing in the world could really separate us. He'd whispered it once, late, half awake, like it was something too honest to say in daylight. He said he wanted to sleep next to me forever. Said he wanted us to wrestle and argue and exist in that same orbit for the rest of our lives, just the two of us. Like time wouldn't do what it always does. Like people wouldn't change, like he wouldn't. At the time, it had sounded like permanence. Like certainty, like something that couldn't be broken because it hadn't been tested yet. Now it just sat in my memory like something I didn't know how to file correctly anymore. Tate had forgotten it, or maybe he hadn't. Maybe he just stopped choosing it. He had abandoned it the same way he abandoned everything that stopped fitting the version of him that other people applauded. First, it was small things, distance, jokes that cut a little deeper than they used to, the way attention shifted elsewhere without warning. Then it became something bigger, something I couldn't pretend to notice anymore, and eventually it wasn't just distance. It was a replacement, a girl, a life that wasn't me in it. Susie shifted slightly in her chair but didn't interrupt. Her eyes stayed on me, not pushing, just present. I swallowed once, throat still dry even after the water. It used to feel real, I said quietly, more to the ceiling than to her. What he said. My voice came out rough, uneven around the edges. He made it sound like we were inevitable. A short breath left me, almost a laugh but without humor behind it. And then he just didn't choose it. Tate didn't want me or us anymore, maybe he never did. Susie finally spoke, her voice low. People change, she said carefully. I turned my head slightly toward her, just enough to acknowledge I heard her. That's not the part that hurts, I said. A pause. The part that hurts, I added, slower now, is that I believed it meant something permanent when it didn't. Susie didn't try to fix that. She didn't argue it away. She just sat with it like she understood there wasn't anything useful to say that wouldn't make it worse. My grip on the glass loosened a little. I keep thinking about how easy it was for him, I said, to move on, to build something else, like none of that ever mattered. My eyes stayed on the ceiling again. And I'm still here, I added quietly, holding on to things he already let go of. The room stayed still for a moment. Susie's voice came softer than before. You're not wrong for remembering it, she said. I didn't respond right away, because I didn't know if remembering it was the problem, or if it was the only thing I knew how to do. Tate had sworn at 18 that he only wanted his heart to touch mine, like it was the simplest truth in the world and nothing could ever complicate it. Back then he said it with that same certainty he used for everything, like feelings were facts if you said them strongly enough, like time wouldn't get a vote in any of it. So what had happened in 8 years? I lay there trying to find a clean answer for it, but nothing came out clean anymore. Everything felt layered now, memory on top of memory, intention on top of behavior, promises buried under the way people actually live when they grow up and start choosing different versions of themselves. Maybe nothing happened all at once. Maybe it was just a slow erosion I didn't notice until there wasn't much left to hold onto in the same way, small distances that turned into habits, choices that stopped including me without anyone announcing it. The kind of drifting that doesn't feel like abandonment while it's happening, only after it's already complete. And somewhere in that space, Tate stopped being the boy who said things like that and became someone who could build an entirely different life without needing to look back at what he once promised. I swallowed, my throat still dry even after the water, and stared at the ceiling like it might offer something more stable than my own thoughts. Susie didn't interrupt. She just sat there, watching me carefully like she understood this wasn't something she could talk me out of. What happened, I said again, quieter this time, is that he didn't stay that person. My voice cracked slightly at the end, not from volume but from exhaustion. And I did, I added. The room stayed still after that, heavy in a way that didn't need anyone else to speak to feel full. I could understand Tate moving on during high school or even after Brown University when everything was still shifting and people were still becoming who they were going to be. I could understand distance forming when life started pulling in different directions, when priorities changed, and identities stopped matching the versions we had of each other in our heads. But then I thought about something else, something that didn't fit neatly into any of those excuses. Tate had bought me a house when we were 22 years old to convince me to stay with him. Not as a gesture of nostalgia, not as some teenage idea of forever that could be softened by time. He was in his mid-20s, not a kid anymore, old enough to understand consequences, old enough to know what it meant to try to anchor someone to you with something that permanent, something that looked like commitment but functioned like leverage. A house, something solid, something heavy, something that implied staying wasn't just emotional anymore, it was structural, material, real in a way that couldn't be easily undone without leaving marks. And still, he had moved on. Not just moved on in the abstract sense of growing apart, but moved on into something very specific, into heteronormative relationships that came with expectations already laid out for him. Girls who fit into the version of life that people expected him to step into. A future shaped by social approval, family ease, and matrimonial pathways that made sense in the world he was choosing to inhabit. Engagements that looked right on paper, relationships that didn't require explanation, a life that didn't sit outside what people already understood as normal. That was the part that kept looping in my head. Not just that he had left me, but that he had left me while still building something that fit neatly into everyone else's expectations, something I was never going to be part of, no matter what promises he had once made in private. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of it settling in slowly, because it wasn't only that he had chosen a different life. It was that he had chosen a life that made room for everyone but me, and somehow, even after all of it, I was still the one remembering what he said when he didn't know yet how easy it would be to stop meaning it. The day before Tate met Chloe, he told me marriage was something he'd avoid for life. He said it like it wasn't even up for debate, like it was one of the few things he felt completely certain about in a world where everything else kept shifting under his feet. Tate said he hated family photos, those perfectly staged images where everyone stood close enough to look connected, but not close enough for anything real to show through. He hated the idea of orchestrated families, the facades people built for holidays and events, the way everyone performed stability for an audience that didn't actually know what was happening behind the smiles. He talked about social images like they made him uncomfortable in his own skin, like the idea of being watched and interpreted through something curated felt wrong to him. And when it came to marriage, especially monogamous relationships, especially anything that looked like a traditional, settled structure centered around romantic love, he said it made him feel sick. He didn't just say he wasn't interested, he said it like it was something his body rejected, something incompatible with who he was. That version of him felt absolute at the time, like it couldn't bend, like it couldn't be rewritten, and then Chloe happened. And suddenly, the things he said he would never step into didn't just become possible, they became his life. The same structure he once described as suffocating became something he moved toward willingly, even publicly, even permanently. I lay there on the couch, staring at nothing in particular, trying to hold those two versions of him in the same mind without them tearing each other apart. The boy who said marriage made him ill, and the man who stood in front of it anyway. Susie was still in the room somewhere, quieter now, letting me think without interrupting. But my thoughts didn't feel calm. They felt like they were trying to solve something that didn't have a solution that made emotional sense. Because if he could change that completely, something he once spoke about as it defined him, then what part of anything he said to me was ever stable in the first place? And what did that mean for everything I had believed he couldn't let go of? The question didn't land gently. It just stayed there, unresolved, as the room around me remained still. Tate used to speak about family like it was a trap disguised as something sacred. He said it with certainty, like he had already seen behind the curtain and refused to ever play along. Marriage, husbands, conventional lives, those belonged to other people, people who needed structure or approval or something he claimed he didn't. The Tate I knew rejected all of it, almost violently. He lived outside those lines on purpose. And yet now, he was stepping directly into them. It would be easier, cleaner if I could say Chloe changed him, that she came into his life and rewrote him so completely that everything he once believed simply disappeared. But people don't usually work like that. They don't abandon themselves overnight, not without something already shifting beneath the surface. The harder truth sat somewhere else. Maybe the old Tate, the one who slept with me, who swore he'd never be anyone's husband, never live a conventional life, wasn't as fixed as he seemed. Maybe those beliefs weren't permanent truths but defenses, a way to keep a distance, a way to avoid becoming the very thing he feared he might need. Or maybe he hasn't changed at all. Maybe this version of Tate, the one standing on the edge of marriage, stepping into a role he used to despise, isn't a transformation but a contradiction. The same person, just choosing a different performance. Because hating something doesn't always stop you from becoming it. Sometimes it just means you understand exactly how it works. And that's what makes it feel so unsettling, because the Tate who wouldn't be caught dead as a husband is now willingly becoming one. So the question isn't just whether Chloe changed him. It's whether Tate ever really was who he said he was, or if this version of him has been there all along, waiting for a reason to exist. Noah sat in his living room as if it had stopped belonging to him. The couch was the same. The coffee table still had that faint scratch on the corner from when something had been dropped too hard years ago. The lamp in the corner still leaned slightly to the left, no matter how many times he straightened it. But everything felt staged now, like he was sitting inside the afterimage of a life that had already moved on without him. He kept replaying the same thought, not because it was comforting but because it was structured, clean, contained, easier than everything else. Tate didn't love him. That was the truth Noah kept circling, the conclusion he resisted until it hardened into something undeniable, something with edges sharp enough to cut through every memory he once tried to soften. Tate Blue had never loved Noah Lunas. Whatever he had offered, those late-night murmurs, those half-formed promises whispered into the dim quiet of a bedroom that felt like a world apart, had not been love. They had been fragments, impulses. Temporary illusions that dissolved the moment they were exposed to time, to distance, to reality, or to a pretty face. Noah could still hear them if he let himself. The softness in Tate's voice, the way he spoke like the moment mattered, like Noah mattered. But memory had a way of polishing things that were never real to begin with. Those words hadn't survived. They hadn't endured the simplest test, time. They were seasonal, like leaves that burned bright for a moment before falling away, unnoticed once they hit the ground. Blink and they were gone. That was what loving Tate felt like trying to hold onto something that was already disappearing in your hands. And maybe that was the deeper truth, the one Noah had avoided because it felt too cruel, too final. Tate wasn't capable of love, not the kind that stayed, not the kind that required patience or sacrifice or any sense of permanence. What Tate understood instead was intensity, obsession, the thrill of wanting and being wanted, of possessing someone completely for a brief, consuming moment. He could make a person feel chosen, irreplaceable, like the center of something vast and important, but it never lasted because it was never meant to. People had warned Noah, Wayne, Madison, Joey, others whose names blurred together now, voices he had dismissed because they didn't fit the version of Tate he wanted to believe in. They had all said the same thing in different ways. Tate treated people as temporary, disposable. It didn't matter how long you stayed, how much you gave, how deeply you intertwined your life with his. There was no threshold, no point at which you became safe. You could be there for 2 minutes, 2 months, 22 years, it made no difference. Longevity didn't grant immunity, time didn't make you special, it only gave you more to lose when the inevitable happened. And it always happened. Noah tried to argue with that once. He had believed that what they had was different, that history meant something, that all the shared moments, messy, complicated, intimate, had built toward something real. But now looking back, he saw how easily Tate had let it all go. Not with anger, not even with hesitation, but with a kind of casual indifference that was almost worse. Like clearing out a room, tossing aside things that no longer served a purpose. Like garbage left behind in a living room, forgotten the moment it was out of sight. That was the part that lingered, that refused to soften, the ease of it, the lack of weight. Noah had carried Tate like something fragile and essential, something that required care and attention and constant effort to keep from breaking. But to Tate, Noah had been, what? A phase, a convenience, something to hold on to until something else caught his interest. It rewrote everything. Every touch, every word, every quiet moment that Noah had once replayed like proof of something deeper. Now they felt hollow, like echoes in an empty space, not lies exactly, but not truth either, just something in between, something incomplete. And maybe that was the cruelest realization of all. It hadn't mattered how much Noah loved him. It hadn't mattered how patient he had been, how willing he was to stay, to understand, to forgive. None of it could transform something that was never there to begin with. You couldn't build permanence out of something designed to be temporary. You couldn't turn obsession into love just by enduring it long enough. So Noah stood there in the aftermath of it all, holding on to nothing but clarity. Tate hadn't loved him, not then, not ever, and all the time Noah had spent trying to prove otherwise hadn't made him fireproof. It had only made the fall longer, the impact harder, the truth more devastating when it finally landed. Because in the end, Tate didn't break people in dramatic, explosive ways. He did it quietly, efficiently, by making them believe they mattered right up until the moment he decided they didn't. Noah had been convenient, an orphan, someone who didn't require the same social architecture as other people, no family expectations to negotiate, no background noise of obligations, no competing loyalties, just presence, just availability, just usefulness. The conclusion settled in his chest like something solid. If Tate could regulate his own heat, if he didn't have seizures, if he wasn't afraid of the dark, if his nervous system didn't betray him in quiet, unpredictable ways, then he wouldn't need Noah, and if he didn't need Noah, Noah wouldn't have stayed at all or for very long. Noah exhaled slowly through his nose, staring at the ceiling. That was the part that made it make sense, not love, no choice, need. Susie was talking again, her voice softer this time, like she was trying to place the information somewhere safe before it could turn sharp. Everyone helped with the wedding, she said. People showed up early, they stayed late. Talia cried when she saw the venue set up. She said it looked like something out of. No. Noah didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. The word landed cleanly in the middle of her sentence like a door shutting. Susie stopped. Noah kept his eyes on the floor, jaw tight, hands resting still on his knees like movement might make it worse. I don't want to hear about it, he said. Silence followed immediately, not awkward, not confused, just acknowledged. Susie nodded once slowly like she'd been expecting that boundary and respected it the moment it appeared. She didn't push, she didn't soften it into a suggestion, she just accepted it. Okay, she said. Noah exhaled through his nose, tension still sitting in his shoulders. After a moment he added, quieter but firmer. And I don't want it to come up when I'm around people either. Susie tilted her head slightly. You mean Tate? Noah didn't correct her. I mean all of it, he said. The wedding, him, her, whatever version of that story everyone is going to keep repeating like it's a normal conversation. Susie watched him carefully, reading the line he was drawing. No one's trying to pull you into it, she said. Noah finally looked up at her. That's not what it feels like, he said. It feels like it follows me, like I can't just exist around people without it being in the room. Susie nodded once, then we make it clear. Noah frowned slightly. Clear how? Her voice stayed steady. If you're with people and the conversation shifts there, you don't engage, you don't answer questions, you don't explain anything, you just step out of it. Noah gave a short, tired breath. And if they keep pushing? Susie didn't hesitate. Then you leave the conversation. That sat for a second. Noah's shoulders loosened slightly, but his expression didn't. I don't want to be around anything that turns into him, he said, or her, or any of it. Susie's gaze softened, but she didn't try to fix the feeling. That's a boundary, she said simply. Noah nodded faintly, like he was testing the shape of it in his head. I don't want to hear updates, he added. I don't want stories, I don't want anyone acting like I should have a reaction to something I didn't choose to be part of. Okay, Susie said again, steady, we can make that known. Noah leaned back into the couch, staring at the ceiling for a moment like he was trying to push the entire situation out of the room through force of thought alone. If I start spending time with people, he said, quieter now, I don't want it to turn into access to him, indirectly, through conversations, through gossip, through whatever. Susie nodded slowly. Then you set that expectation up front. Noah glanced at her. And if they can't do that? Susie didn't sugarcoat it. Then they're not safe people for you right now, she said. The word safe made Noah go still for a second. Not comfort, not closure, not understanding, just safe. He looked down again. I just want to be left out of it, he said, completely. Susie's voice softened a fraction. Then we build your life in a way that doesn't require you to carry their version of his story. Noah gave a small, humorless nod. Good, he said quietly, because I'm not part of it anymore. Susie didn't correct him. She just said okay. And for once, the silence that followed didn't feel like something waiting to break. Noah didn't expect Riley to feel like a contrast until he was already sitting in the memory of their first date, replaying it the way his mind kept replaying things lately, looking for patterns, for differences that mattered more than they should. Riley had been direct from the beginning. Not performatively honest, not carefully vague the way people sometimes were when they thought clarity might cost them something. Just clear. He said what he wanted, what he didn't, what he could offer, what he couldn't. No gaps left for Noah to fill in later with anxiety. And weirdly, Noah had found it calming. There were no hidden tests, no emotional riddles, no shifting answers depending on the moment. When Noah asked questions, real ones, the kind he usually braced for someone to dodge, Riley didn't deflect or shut him down. He answered, or he said he didn't know yet. Or he said no plainly without making it feel like rejection was a punishment. It was the first time in a long time that Noah hadn't walked away from someone with more questions than answers. Riley just says things, Noah said quietly, almost to himself, sitting back in the living room like the thought had followed him home. Like he means them exactly the way he says them. Susie glanced over. That sounds rare for you. Noah gave a faint, tired shrug. It is. He hesitated, then added, he doesn't hide anything. And he doesn't get weird when I don't understand something right away, he just explains it again. Susie's expression shifted slightly, interest without interruption. Noah kept going, voice quieter now, steadier in a different way. He doesn't want to sleep with me, he said that up front too, not like a game, just that he's not looking for that right now. A pause. And he doesn't want to use me for anything, Noah added. Not body heat, not space, not whatever else people take without saying it. Susie didn't respond immediately. Noah stared at the floor, as if admitting it out loud made it more real. It's nice, he said finally, almost disbelieving it as he said it. Being around someone who actually likes me and doesn't leave me trying to decode it after we part. His jaw tightened slightly, softer now than earlier in the day. Riley doesn't make me feel like I'm supposed to solve him, he added, or manage him or hold something together for him without being told what it is. He swallowed once. It's just what he says, Noah finished, and what he means, and that's it. Noah let out a slow sigh that seemed to pull something loose in his chest, something he hadn't realized he'd been tightening for weeks. He sat forward slightly on the couch, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor as if it might offer a version of his life that made more sense than the one he was currently living. I think I'll cut my hair, Noah said at last, voice low and uncertain like he was speaking to the idea more than to Susie, and change my clothes, do something different with my life. The words didn't come with excitement. They came with exhaustion and a strange kind of acceptance, as if he was finally admitting that something inside him had already started moving, whether he approved of it or not. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, exhaling again. Riley and I are going to go out tomorrow, Noah added. Just do something fun, normal, whatever that means. The word normal felt unfamiliar in his mouth, like it didn't quite belong to him anymore. Susie didn't interrupt. She just watched him the way she had started doing more often lately, not like she was waiting for him to be fixed, but like she was waiting for him to finish becoming whatever version of himself was trying to surface. Noah kept his gaze down, as if looking at her would make the admission heavier than it already felt. It's weird, he said after a moment, quieter now, because this is not how I wanted my life to go. His mouth tightened slightly, the truth sitting there uncomfortably honest. I didn't picture it like this. I didn't picture any of this. His hand made a small, vague gesture that didn't point to anything specific but somehow included everything anyway: Tate, the past, the house, the living room, the entire weight of everything that had once felt like it might become permanent. Then he exhaled again, sharper this time. But it's not like I have any choice. Susie finally shifted, leaning forward slightly in her seat. You always have choices, she said, not harsh but firm enough that it cut through the softness in the room. Noah let out a faint, humorless sound at that, almost a laugh but not quite, and shook his head. That's not what it feels like, he muttered. It feels like things already happened and I'm just catching up to them. His eyes flicked briefly toward the window, toward the outside world that kept moving whether he participated in it or not. I'm not trying to make some big statement, he added, quieter again. I'm just tired of standing still in the middle of something that already ended. Susie watched him for a long moment before speaking again. Cutting your hair isn't the same as resetting your life, she said carefully. Noah shrugged slightly, but there was less resistance in it than before. It feels like it though, he admitted. Like if I change enough on the outside, maybe it stops matching what's going on inside. He paused, then corrected himself under his breath, almost annoyed at his own wording. Or maybe it just distracts me long enough to not think about it. His fingers tapped lightly against his knee, restless. Riley makes it easier to think about that stuff, he added after a beat. Because he doesn't complicate things, he just says what he means, and I don't have to spend all this time trying to figure out what's underneath it. Susie tilted her head slightly. And you like that, she said. It wasn't a question. Noah nodded once. Yeah, he said simply. Then after a pause he added, it's quiet in a good way. His voice softened slightly as he continued, the edges of tension easing just a little. He told me what he wants from people, what he doesn't want, what he's available for, and it's not a guessing game. There's no hidden layer I'm supposed to decode later when I'm already in too deep, he swallowed. With him, I don't feel like I'm constantly being tested without knowing the rules. Susie leaned back slightly, absorbing that. Noah continued anyway, as if once the words started, they didn't want to stop. Silence stretched again, but it felt different than before, less like pressure, more like space. I don't know where this is going, Noah said finally, quieter now, honesty sitting a little heavier in his voice. I don't think I'm supposed to know, I just know I'm going tomorrow. He exhaled, leaning back into the couch again, eyes drifting toward the ceiling like it had become his default place to look when thinking got too layered. And I think I'm going to cut my hair before that, he added almost absently, as if the decision had already quietly slipped into place without asking permission. Susie nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Noah gave a faint nod back, not because everything felt resolved, but because, for once, it didn't feel like he was being pulled in 5 directions at the same time. And even though the future still didn't feel like something he chose so much as something he was moving through, at least now it had edges he could see. Susie could tell Noah wasn't just tired in the usual sense. It wasn't the kind of exhaustion that sleep fixed or time softened. It was deeper than that emotional depletion, the kind that made even sitting upright feel like effort. He was still on the couch, but he wasn't really there in any active way anymore. His eyes were fixed on the wall, unfocused, as if whatever he was thinking about had pulled him somewhere further away than the room could reach. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, stripped of its earlier edges. "You can go now, Susie," he said quietly. "You've done your duty to check up on me and make sure I'm still breathing. You can tell everyone else that poor, pitiful Noah is doing just fine." There was sarcasm in it, but it didn't land like defense. It sounded tired, worn down, like even his attempts at pushing her away had lost their energy. Susie didn't respond immediately. She stayed where she was, watching him carefully. The words were sharp, but his posture wasn't. There was no real anger in the way he sat there, just collapsed, like he had reached a point where maintaining any kind of emotional engagement was too expensive. She recognized the pattern. When Noah felt overwhelmed, he didn't escalate, he withdrew, not dramatically, just less of himself. She could also hear what he was really saying underneath the sarcasm. It wasn't just "leave me alone," it was "I don't want to be perceived like this anymore." Like being checked on meant being reduced to something fragile, something managed, something other people discussed in soft voices when he wasn't in the room. Before she could answer, Noah pushed himself up from the couch. The movement was slow but final. He didn't look at her as he stood, he didn't wait for a response. He just crossed the room toward the hallway, each step steady but distant, like he was moving on autopilot rather than with intention. Susie watched him go, noticing how there was no hesitation in it, no pause, just exit. At the doorway to his bedroom, he stopped only long enough for the door itself to become part of the silence. Then it shut behind him, not loud, not dramatic, just closed. Susie remained seated for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle properly before she moved. Her thoughts came in slowly, not all at once. She was used to Noah deflecting with sarcasm or intellectual arguments, but this felt different. This wasn't him trying to control the narrative. This was him running out of capacity to stay inside it at all. What unsettled her most wasn't the words themselves, it was how quickly he reframed her presence as an obligation. As duty, as something done to him rather than for him. That kind of interpretation didn't come from nowhere, it came from repetition, from experience, from expecting people to eventually reduce concern into pity and pity into distance. She leaned back slightly, exhaling through her nose. Noah didn't actually want her gone, she thought. Not really. But he did want to stop feeling like he was being observed at a time when he couldn't perform being okay. That distinction mattered even if he couldn't make it right now. Susie stayed in the living room a little longer, not because she thought she could fix anything in the moment, but because leaving immediately would confirm the story Noah had already started telling himself. And she knew him well enough to understand that sometimes the most important thing wasn't responding. It was not reinforcing the worst version of what someone believed about themselves. Within a few weeks, Susie could tell Noah had shifted in a way that wasn't loud enough for most people to notice, but was impossible to miss if you had been watching him closely. He was quieter now, not just in speech but in presence itself, like he had started occupying less space without meaning to. He still went to work meetings, still functioned in the basic mechanical ways life demanded, but anything beyond that seemed optional to him in a way it hadn't before. Conversation didn't invite him in anymore, it passed over him and he let it. He stopped going to Sunday dinners weeks before the wedding at Talia's house, and it hadn't changed after Tate left. That alone would have been enough to signal something had changed. Those Sundays had been constant for years, predictable, familiar, stitched into the structure of his life and Tate's long before either of them understood what they were building. Years of showing up at the same place, sitting at the same table, knowing the rhythm of who arrived when and who sat where without ever having to think about it. It had become something like family, even when everything inside it was complicated. Now Noah just didn't go. No explanation that satisfied anyone, no argument that stuck, just absence. Susie still went, though she didn't want to. She sat through the same living room gatherings where people acted like nothing had shifted, like the absence of someone who had been part of the structure of those Sundays for over a decade didn't leave a gap in the room. The conversations continued anyway, updates, laughter, small domestic stories that stacked on top of each other like normal life refusing to acknowledge anything had fractured underneath it. And Tate wasn't there. He was on his honeymoon for 3 months. That fact floated through every conversation indirectly, even when no one said it out loud. It hung in the background like a correction that didn't need repeating. Susie found herself noticing how often people almost mentioned him and then didn't, like the topic had been placed carefully out of reach. She didn't want to think about Tate either, not because she cared about him less but because there was something uncomfortable about the timing of everything. How quickly life had reorganized itself around his absence from those Sundays while simultaneously marking his presence somewhere else as permanent and celebrated. And yet, even without Tate there, the shape of him was still in the room, especially when she thought about Noah. Because Noah didn't come anymore and no one quite knew what to do with that either. When people asked Susie, she kept it simple. Busy, tired, needing space, all technically true, none of them complete. It was easier that way, easier than trying to explain the way Noah had started withdrawing from anything that felt remotely tied to shared history. Noah acted like he didn't care anymore. That was the part that stuck with her most. Not anger, not heartbreak, not even avoidance in the usual sense. It was something flatter than all of those things, like he had stepped outside of the emotional framework entirely and decided it didn't apply to him anymore. When Susie saw him during the week, he still functioned, still spoke when necessary, still responded appropriately. But there was a distance now that hadn't been there before. Like he was participating in life rather than living inside it. And whenever Tate came up indirectly through someone else's comment, a passing mention, a story from the wedding that slipped into conversation, Noah didn't react anymore. Not visibly, not in a way anyone could use as confirmation that it mattered to him. That worried Susie more than anything else, because indifference when it wasn't real wasn't indifference at all. It was containment, it was control, it was the attempt to make something so emotionally charged become irrelevant by force of decision rather than healing. At Talia's house on Sundays, Susie sat through it all, watching familiar people move through familiar routines and felt the strange dissonance of it. Life continued exactly as it always had. While one of the longest-standing threads in it had quietly stepped away without announcement. And even though no one said it directly, Susie could feel the unspoken questions sitting underneath everything. If Noah wasn't showing up anymore, what part of that history was still intact? Susie noticed the change most clearly in the way Noah erased things. Not in a dramatic way, not in denial that made itself obvious, but in something quieter and more unsettling. He acted like certain parts of his life had never existed at all, as if memory itself had been edited down to only what he could still tolerate carrying. When people mentioned history, shared houses, old routines, long-standing connections, Noah didn't correct them, but he also didn't confirm them. Noah simply didn't engage, like the topic wasn't missing so much as irrelevant. It extended further than anyone expected. He acted as if he had never shared a home with Tate, like the years between them had never formed into anything structured enough to leave traces. Even the detail of the house, Tate buying it, the weight of what that had meant at the time, seemed to have fallen out of his internal narrative completely. If someone brought up anything connected to it, Noah's expression would stay neutral in a way that made it unclear whether he was avoiding the subject or genuinely no longer locating it in his emotional map of the world. Susie also noticed how he stopped acknowledging certain family connections as anything personal. Talia and Terrence were still part of the background of his life, but Noah behaved as if he had no embedded place within it. As if he were not someone who had grown inside that household's orbit for years, but someone who simply passed through it occasionally. Even the idea of being a surrogate son, something that had once carried emotional weight and ambiguity, was no longer referenced at all, not rejected. Not affirmed, just gone, as it had never been named in the first place. The strangest part was that no one corrected him. At Sunday gatherings, now replaced entirely by smaller, more neutral meetings at restaurants instead of homes, people adapted around him. Conversations adjusted their tone, their topics, their references. If something brushed too close to Tate or the past, it was gently rerouted. Not out of conspiracy or avoidance, but out of a growing awareness that Noah simply would not meet that part of reality anymore. Tate himself wasn't discussed either. Not since the wedding, not since the honeymoon, not since whatever version of closure people assumed had taken place without needing to define it. His name existed now in a kind of suspended silence, present in memory but absent in speech. Susie could feel how carefully that absence was managed by everyone, like touching it too directly might collapse something fragile that no one had agreed to name. And Noah adapted to that silence completely. He stopped going to Talia's house altogether. There were no more Sundays in the familiar living room, no more automatic place at the table, no more shared history unfolding in real time. Instead, they met in restaurants, neutral spaces with no inherited memory attached to them. Places where conversation had to be built from scratch each time, rather than picked up from where it had last been left. It made him harder to read, but also in some ways easier to be around. He laughed less in those settings, or at least appeared to. He seldom participated in conversation without the weight of history pulling at him from the edges. And over time, Susie noticed something else. His body had changed slightly. Not dramatically, but enough to be noticeable if you had been watching closely. A little more weight on his frame, a bit more presence in his posture, like his body was no longer being held in the same kind of emotional suspension it had been in before. She noticed it one evening at a restaurant when he reached for his drink, and the movement felt more grounded than it used to, less fragile, less like he might disappear into himself mid-motion. Without thinking too hard about it, she said, half joking but not entirely, "You're getting a bit solid now, less breakable." Noah looked at her briefly, then huffed a quiet laugh. "Is that your official diagnosis?" "Observation," Susie corrected. After a beat she added, "You're less angular than you were." That earned a real look from him this time. Angular. "You know what I meant." He shook his head slightly, amused despite himself. "That's a weird way to say I've put on weight." "I didn't say it was bad," she replied immediately. There was a pause and then she said it again, this time with more certainty than teasing. "Twinkie," she added under her breath. Noah blinked once. "Excuse me." Susie didn't even try to hide her expression. "You heard me." He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "That's insane." "It's accurate," she said, completely unbothered. "No, it's not. It's affectionate," she corrected. Noah leaned back in his chair, still laughing a little under his breath. "I'm not sure I like what's happening to my identity in your hands." "You're still you," Susie said, more softly now, "just less like you're bracing for impact all the time." That line landed differently. Noah didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked down at his glass for a moment, rotating it slightly on the table as if grounding himself in something physical. Then he said, quieter, "I don't really think about him anymore." Susie didn't ask who the he Noah meant, she just nodded once slowly. "Okay," she said. But as she watched him after that, still present, still talking, still sitting there in a way that suggested life was continuing forward, she couldn't help noticing the difference between not thinking about something and no longer allowing it to exist in the same world at all. Susie usually ended up sitting beside Andrew at Sunday dinners, a habit that had formed without discussion and then quietly solidified into routine. It wasn't romantic in any obvious way, not something announced or performed, but it had a kind of ease to it that made the rest of the table feel slightly more formal by comparison. Andrew had always been steady like that, present without demanding attention, observant without intruding. He was still working on his doctorate now, and people around the table joked that it wouldn't be long before he was being addressed as Dr. Andrew Lott, a title that made him visibly uncomfortable in a way that suggested he still hadn't fully accepted how far he had come. Noah didn't bring Tate up either. No one really did anymore, not directly. Tate existed in the same careful silence that had started to form around anything too emotionally loaded for group conversation. It wasn't avoidance in the loud sense, it was something more practiced, like collective restraint. Susie noticed it most in Andrew, though, because he was usually the one who would have been most likely to say something honest out loud, even if it made the room briefly awkward. Instead, Andrew stayed neutral. He talked about coursework, about research, about clinical observations and academic frustrations. He asked questions about other people's lives and listened properly to the answers. He behaved in every visible way like someone who had compartmentalized successfully, but Susie got the feeling that he hadn't, not really. There were moments, small, almost unnoticeable, that gave it away if you were paying attention. The way Andrew's gaze would drift slightly when a silence opened up at the table, not uncomfortable, just distant. The way he sometimes paused half a second too long before responding to something unrelated, like part of his attention was still occupied elsewhere. Nothing that would draw comment, nothing anyone else would likely notice. But Susie noticed. Tate wasn't present in conversation anymore, but he wasn't absent in people's minds either. Not completely. Especially not Andrew's, even if Andrew never named it. And yet, outwardly, everything continued as if that absence had already been resolved into something final. Tate was gone in a very specific way now, physically elsewhere, not emotionally accounted for in conversation, traveling through Europe with the kind of curated permanence that made it sound like a different life entirely. People mentioned it occasionally in passing briefly, like a status update rather than a person's unfolding reality. Italy, France, somewhere coastal. Photos that circulated quietly and then were put away again. It should have felt like distance would make things easier to talk about. Instead, it made them more untouchable. Susie sat beside Andrew one evening while the table talked around them, plates shifting, chairs scraping lightly against the floor, the rhythm of a familiar gathering continuing without interruption. Andrew listened more than he spoke, occasionally adding something thoughtful but never steering the conversation toward anything personal that felt too sharp. But Susie could feel it in him anyway. Not grief exactly, not fixation, something closer to unfinished processing, like a thought that had never fully been allowed to complete itself. At one point, someone at the table mentioned Tate briefly, something harmless, something almost incidental, and the conversation moved on quickly as if it had brushed against a surface no one wanted to linger on. Andrew didn't react visibly. He didn't pause, he didn't redirect or engage. But Susie noticed the slight stillness that followed in him anyway, not external, internal, like something in his attention had quietly reoriented itself before returning to the room. Later, when the conversation had shifted entirely and laughter had returned to the table in a different direction, Susie glanced at him. He was looking down at his hands, relaxed in posture, fully present in appearance. But she had known him long enough now to recognize the difference between someone who wasn't thinking about a person and someone who had simply gotten used to thinking about them without ever saying it aloud. Andrew never stopped thinking about Tate, he just stopped making it visible. And Susie, sitting beside him at Sunday dinner, tried to avoid talking about Tate.